Kelly Walker. I worked with Otis Elevator Company, and I started with them in March of 1994, so that's 26 years. Perfect.
So how did you first become interested in your career?
So it's kind of a funny story a little bit. I'm an English major. I graduated in 1991 from Appalachian State University, and I had a what would you say, an internship really. It was just a project on what to do for, getting out of school and what it was looking like. And the thing that we did for the professor, me and this other young lady whose name I do not remember, was we looked at recruiters and whether or not it was worth paying a recruiter to find you a job. And what we found out in that process, I remember that there are fee-paid positions, not all of them, but some of them, and it turned out that the preponderance of sales jobs were fee-paid. And so I just remember contacting a sales recruiter because I knew I wouldn't have to pay anything. And so what happened there was I ended up in copier sales, which is kind of like a proving ground. And I guess they still sell copy machines, but at the time, it was very much a dog-eat-dog world, and some days you felt like the leg. But the good thing is that if you could last, in order to survive, you had to pick up some sales skills pretty quickly. And either you sold or you didn't. So either you sank or you swam. And I learned how to swim. And so that led through a series of jobs. And I ended up at another recruiting position, which ultimately led to a job with Dictaphone. Now, they found out that they sold most of their equipment to existing users, doctors, lawyers, whomever. So it was like, all right, if you want, to have a good idea, instead of just going door to door necessarily, go through these owner's cards. Well, there came across this card for Otis Elevator Company. And I had in my mind, dirt floor shop, some old rundown rickety place, whatever. And I remember calling the sales manager, a guy named Jeff Searcy, and did what I was supposed to do, not sell over the phone, sold the appointment, went over there, visited with him, did our usual spiel, which was about time management and productivity and other stuff. And I could tell he was really kind of perking up, and I thought, well, this is great, I'll get something out of it. Well, through probably several different times of visiting with him, it became really clear he was more interested in me than any kind of dictation equipment. So I actually never sold the guy a thing except myself. And so I think, it's a long way to answer your question, which is I think that for me, finding other sales opportunities to learn and hone my skills presented me in a good way to a professional organization like Otis. So by the time that I started there, I think I was 26 or 27, I had at least 4 or 5 years of sales experience. But I'm glad where I ended up, and obviously now 26 years later, I'm still here. Well, so Otis does recruit out of colleges. They do both. They recruit from people that already have experience in the field, as well as I know, for instance, they've participated in job fairs at CSU and other places. And they'll also go to historically black universities, HBUs, some other places where they want to target recruiting. And I think a lot of times they're looking for somebody with a business background or a technical background. But I also had a boss. I was an English major. I had a boss at one time. She was my sales manager. She was a theater major. Nice thing with a company like Otis too, and some of the larger, I would say more professional organizations will offer some form of academic assistance. So what's nice at Otis is that you can go and you can finish a 4-year degree, you can go take a graduate degree, you can get a PhD through Otis, formerly part of United Technologies, and they'll pay for it. So as an English major, I went back and got my MBA at the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks, and Otis paid for the whole thing, books, tuition, everything, start to finish. And at the time, I got a $10,000 stock bonus too for completing. It was a nice graduation gift. Too, that a lot of these organizations are going to allow you development opportunities for you to continue and to hone. Because they understand. I mean, if you're 22, 23, coming out of college, you don't know a whole lot. But are you able to be taught? Are you willing to take those next steps? Of it, I mean, you obviously need to know how to communicate well. I think for any profession, you need to know how to read what you're and absorb information. You need to be able to pass on information concisely, write a proper email, not just in a text format. Although things have changed, and I do text a lot with customers, but you still have to be able to communicate in a professional manner. You have to be able to speak in a professional manner. You also have to be able to have some technical grasp of what it is you're trying to do. So I think there are a number of ways that you can build a background like that. Would imagine that Otis is competitive in that sense. So I'm going to guess, I don't know, maybe in the 50s or 60s. I earn significantly higher than that, but that's because I've been around a lot longer. Also, too, the nice thing, depending on where you're at and what the compensation structure is, on a good year, I can double my salary through incentives and bonuses and what we call incentive compensation, or IC for us. But bonuses, whatever the name is, there's a good potential upside with that. But obviously, initially, as you're learning it, it's, that part of it isn't going to be as great. But yeah, I would tell you that especially somewhere like Otis, they're going to be more selective, but the more selective places are going to pay you better. And there's always a potential for upside. I remember somebody telling me one time, you want a pay raise? Go out and sell something. My advice is, in terms of getting into sales, if somebody is really ready and eager to hire you without spending a lot of time on it, you need to really think twice about that, because the longer it takes to get into a company and to get a job, that's more telling of how selective they are, which is telling of how often there's turnover. High turnover equals be wary. Now, again, depending on if you're just trying to accumulate experience and you understand that up front, there was high turnover in copier sales. There's high turnover in office equipment. There's high turnover in a lot of different sales positions. Again, you got to long-term strategize, think about it, in a lot of ways, building experience, and that may be in a high turnover thing, but don't plan on making a career for something where they're consistently advertising for help wanted and that sort of thing. That should tell you something. I would also encourage you to consider, again, it depends on the industry, but to look, especially as you get older, into your later 20s and into your 30s, to look for some stability and look to stay at a place longer. It speaks better of you, you learn more, you become more valuable. There's this, at Otis, there's this constant thing about they don't want to see you in the office too much, right? Because if you're in the office, that means you're not necessarily out there selling to somebody. But again, it just depends on the type of market. For what I do now, so like for instance at Otis, there are three main categories. You're selling either new elevators for new construction, you're selling service, which is service and repair for people who have an existing elevator, or what I focus on now, which is modernization. A lot of what I do is project management, meaning that there's a fair amount of computer work, desktop work, whatever, and using software like that. So now with a laptop, it could be anywhere, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be in an office. I know I've been working mostly at home, but I do go out and I see customers and I do surveys and look at elevator equipment. So I think but there's a lot of interaction that happens over the phone. There's a lot of interaction that happens in email, texting even, but there is ultimately no substitute for face-to-face. So whether or not that you have to do that through Zoom or whatever, but we will get past this COVID thing and it will get back to, seeing people and creating interactions and that sort of thing. And I think trying to be interested in the other person and trying to really get to know them as an individual, not just as a customer, if you will, but I want to know about you, Elizabeth. Tell me about your background. Everybody, and again, that's for building relationships. That's for building what's the word I'm trying to think of? Rapport. I'm more into what I would call relationship sales, which means I want to have a long-term, and I do. I have customers. We've lived here in Denver for, I guess we're going into our 15th year, and I've got customers I've known the entire time. and I would consider them friends. I make sure I take their calls. They know that they can count on me. We just secured a $3 million 12 elevator modernization in Highlands Ranch through a relationship that I built up probably 8 or 10 years ago with another gentleman. And he remembers me, and we haven't done business together for a while because of just the nature of him moving from one property management company to another. And that's just nothing against him. That's just the nature of that business. But when that came around again, he remembered me. He knew me. He can count on me. And that's something else too. I think that people need to think about this in terms of the long run, is that you are building a reputation. Unless you're moving from market to market, like you're moving from Phoenix to Seattle to Charlotte or something like that. But if you're staying in a particular area, your reputation will become known. And that's something people need to think about in terms of, more than just next year. What about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? I can't tell you how many different times I've interacted with people and they weren't really important per se, and I put that in air quotes. They weren't like a critical decision maker, but it was somebody I knew, somebody that got to see how I interacted, whatever. And then to come around months, years later, and all of a sudden that person is what we call a decision maker. Somebody that says, okay, I remember you. I remember how you reacted. I remember how you took care of us, whatever. Or it could be the situation of, I remember how that didn't work out so well. And things can come back to you. And whether you want to call it karma or whatever, in terms of being a professional, and no matter what it is, but especially in sales, because maybe sometime you'll be trying to, get work out of that person, or maybe you'll try to get hired with that person. And, people pay attention and they remember things. And I think that's critical in terms of a professional aspect of whatever job it is, but especially in sales. What goes around comes around. And, if you act ethically as you should, if you behave professionally as you should, and sometimes you don't win things and, maybe you felt like you were dealt unfairly, but if you behave in a manner that's appropriate, it will come back to you. And I can promise you, as a person of, in this particular market for 15 years, that is 100% true. Another guru was a guy named Jeffrey Gitomer, and I think one of the things he said was, all things being equal, people like to buy from people that they know and like. And even when things aren't equal, they still like to buy from people that they know and like. You know what I mean? So it's, if you know this person, if they can trust you, as a, for instance, in my business, one of the things that I found that builds that is when you can make a recommendation. Hey, I don't think you need to spend your money on that. I think that's a waste. I think you need to do this instead. And in a good selling relationship, we're going to talk for 45 minutes, and I guarantee you elevators will be no more than 10 minutes of it. Good employers should know that their people are the face of the company. So, if they see Kelly Walker as part of that process or as part of Otis Elevator, and I know I can trust Otis because Kelly Walker said that they're going to do it and they're going to fix it, I trust Kelly, then that's what Otis wants. Well, obviously I like selling. I like making money. I'm definitely, we used to have a president of Otis, a guy named Ray Mancini, who had a saying that people are coin operated. All right. Now, take that with to a limited degree. That does not to say that people will do, most people will not just do anything for the sake of money, but it means that people, and economics talks about this, people respond to incentives, right? So a lot of times if you're considering a degree in college, are you going to try and, are you going to take your financial earnings into consideration with the job that you're looking for? Most people do. That's considered an incentive. What about, it doesn't always have to be money though. So one of the aspects that's challenging, or especially in service department, is dealing with angry customers. And that's something that is a challenge for anybody, and it happens anywhere. But you have to learn to deal with that. You have to learn not to take it personally. And I know that I remember the challenges that I went through, but I'm thinking of another guy who's younger at our office. Love this guy. I think he's got great long-term potential, but he takes everything so personally, which is also an asset. all right? Because his customers will see that and they'll know that he takes it personally. And, we have a joke. There's a couple of brothers that work, two brothers that work for us, and they always think they're going to get fired. Oh, I'm getting fired. I just know it. They would be the last people to get fired, but they take it so seriously, and they're constantly thinking about, they have this healthy sense of fear that they need to perform and do what's right, and do quality work and meet their requirements of their job. So, dealing with angry people, keeping in the back of your mind the requirements that you have. And it's funny because it seems like a lot of times the people who get let go are the ones that never saw it coming. That's because you weren't paying attention. If you are paying attention and you really do care about your metrics, your performance margins, are you keeping people happy? Are you getting enough, work sold and so forth? You will not be the person that has to deal with that situation. So anyway, so that's one of the tougher aspects is, if you're not selling, you're not gonna be there terribly long. Now, obviously, learning curves and other stuff like that, right? But now, one of the beneficial sides of it is it's fantastic when you can go in and solve a problem. When somebody who really gets it, who understands that you went way out of your way, you took ownership, you answered calls on a weekend that you didn't have to, you made financial decisions for their benefit. Hey, I know we didn't get this done right. You're not going to have to pay for this. We'll absorb this cost. We're doing this for the sake of a long term. I'm thinking about, a customer, actually a guy that just did some car repair work for me. He had the vehicle a lot longer than he anticipated. Somebody stole the catalytic converter off the bottom of the vehicle. They ended up catching the guy, the police did, but he fixed that at his cost, didn't ask me for it. He had to have some other work subbed out. He didn't charge me any markup. He just was a straight pass-through cost. In other words, he he gave up profit that he could have had for me by marking up what somebody else did for him, and instead he just passed it through in consideration of how much longer it took to get this repair. And you know what? I'll keep going to that guy. So we made some short-term decisions for a long-term gain. So when that goes right, when somebody just doesn't burn you, meaning that, yeah, I'm glad you did that for me. Now I'm going to find somebody else who can do something for me better. When you create that long-term partnership, that is something that makes you really feel good. When somebody sends you an email, a text, talks to your boss, says, hey, I really appreciate what so-and-so did for me. Wow, that's fantastic. Yes, I do. The nice thing for me is I don't travel overnight very often. A few days a month here and there, but most service sales people and just in general, at least at Otis, they don't have to travel a lot. I mean, and if they do, it's during the day. And like yesterday, I drove up to Wyoming, but I came back, so I got to be here. So no concerns with that. Now, again, there are different types of sales jobs. Some will require more travel than others. Usually they do a good job about telling you that up front. I think there's been more of a trend, though, through things like email, Zoom, other stuff like that, texting, phone calls. Companies and people have realized that you can still get a lot of stuff done. But again, ultimately, there's no substitute for that. But yeah, very family friendly. And I would just say, too, that depending on if you're married and if you have kids, if you decide that one spouse or the other should decide to stay home to care for, especially for younger children, which is what we did, finding a company that you can take a long-term approach that will understand when you do have to have family commitments and that sort of thing, and also pay you well enough so that the other person can stay home. I found Otis to be very friendly and very easy to work with, which is why I've been there for so long. So that's another thing to consider when you're checking into companies, because you may be single now, but you may not always be that way. As far as where the future is going, I would say too that you need to be aware that everything is changing. Technology is changing everything, but there is no substitute for the one-on-one human communication. That, think about your own purchasing decisions, your own buying situations. you want more than just customer service on a phone. If you're making a purchase or something that's resident, for instance, an elevator, if you're a property manager or a building owner, that thing is there, it's long-term, it's staying there. You want to know that whoever is servicing that, taking care of that, that you can get a person on the phone, somebody come talk to you. Is always keep your long-term, your integrity, your reputation, your professional reputation. Never do anything to sacrifice or risk that. That's so important, because there's so many ways that you have no way to predict how, and some things will never come back to you. You'll never have to deal with a certain person again, but sometimes you might. This, one of my favorite examples is just driving. Somebody flips you off, cuts you off in traffic. You have no idea who that person is or where you'll ever see them again or whatever. And it's kind of hard to just kind of smile and wave and just kind of let it go. But you could pull up and that could be a person that's at that same company, parking lot, whatever that you're going at the time. So always think long term. Always think long term. Now, having said that, one of the little tricks that I always try and talk to new people at Otis about is your organization skills. Never underestimate your ability or the importance of having good organization skills, knowing where to store information, and especially in the market that I'm in. I had a boss a long time ago tell me he or she who documents least loses, because there's so much information that's going back and forth, which is why things like email, where things are documented, conversations are kept up with. And as I tell the people, save. I had a boss tell me one time, just save everything. Not literally everything, but just keep really good records in the email and folders, and know where things are at, know where to find them. And as I told people at Otis, I said, you'll probably only need about 1% of that information. Problem is, you have no idea what 1% you'll need. And I can guarantee you there have been countless times where that one email that I found absolutely saved my tail. Where we did document something, we did find something, or I needed to go back and verify. Oh, there it is. Oh my God, thanks. So there's that. Have good records in a way that you can go back and find it. Don't be helter-skelter, and back up your information. Oh my gosh, back up. We just had a guy, a supervisor at Otis, field supervisor, wasn't backing up his computer crashed. He lost years of valuable information. Now, thankfully, somebody like me that he works with, I did squirrel away a lot of things so he could come back to me and get it. But it's, learn how to document and store information well, so it'll do you well.